second before we do our intros so that we can make sure that everybody can hear us like now. All right, everyone. Like, share, subscribe, hit the super chat. Let me get a comment in the comment box for the first people in so I can know you guys can hear me, you ladies and gents. Yeah, so what we're doing today is reviewing a Miss Shay Sade's video about this kind of really kind of divestors and their ignorance to the environment and what's really going on, and kind of the rise of white nationalists, like Shay Sade said. First, let's shout out Shay Sade. Thank you very much for your work here. This is really good. And Shay kind of spoke to the ignorance of the environment, right? You're not paying attention, you don't care to know. Ignorance is bliss. All you know is that black men are trash and white men do it better, and there you go. And so Shay plays a couple of videos where we can see different types of white men in relation to what they think about race. You see two white men attempting to woo black women or speak about black women. One of them is being actually very racist in his commentary, attempting to attract black women with what we would call kind of African American cuisine, but in a very kind of condescending way. The other one, I guess he's attempting to be flattering by calling black women chocolate babies, and I think he's being sincere, although depending on who you are, maybe a bit offensive. And then you juxtapose that to the racist who practically are walking around with the Hitler salute. Yeah, so let's start like this. There are genuine black women, white men relationships where it's not some type of power play per se. It is not a divestor style relationship. It is not some type of plantation dynamic they have going on. There are genuine black women who are in relationship with white men, and it is on the up and up, right? With that said, Shay is 100% correct. There is a rise in kind of this right-wing nationalism going on in the Western world. Much of that has to do with the ravages of neoliberalism. Much of that has to do with us being in our echo chambers on social media, the bifurcation of our society. A lot of that has to do with kind of this unchecked or investigated, I want to say, kind of classism, especially in Western society, right? So, especially in America, and there is a consequence to that, right? So, what we see going on here is many black women who are not really kind of reading the tea leaves. They're not aware of the environment. They don't really care. All they know is black men are trash and white men do it better. Or they would rather, when they speak about expanding their options, it's like, well, if it sucks here, what's the worst that can happen? Train tracks, more train tracks. Yeah, so what's the worst that can happen with me dating out? And for those people, I say, go out there and have fun. But then we get into kind of this ladder climbing, right? So let me throw out a few numbers real quick. 26% of poor Americans are married, 39% of middle class, 56% of upper middle class and above. That's before we control for race. Average inheritance in America, or median inheritance, I can't remember which one, is somewhere between $50,000 to $75,000. That's once again before we control for race. Average car price in America is some $48,000. Homes are now median going for some 400 plus $1,000. Um, Number one reason for divorce in America is financially related. That's before you control for race. Women file for some 70 to 80% of divorces, once again, before you control for race. Um, so when we consider, oh yeah, and the divorce rate in America is 50%, once again, before we control for race. Um, you know, these things matter, right? So, oh yeah, 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. 60% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Once again, before we control for race, the average American has some 5,000 or so dollars in savings, and that's like them pulling from different things. So, you know, and so how does that play into, you know, the average 40% of Americans can afford a $400 emergency? I don't really understand that. So why does Mr. Z spout off all these numbers? In context of the environment and the society we're living in the 21st century, the ignorance of many black people in general, black women specifically, is why they think and why they speak as if this dating out, particularly to white men, is kind of this silver bullet. And they truly believe that white men are not nearly as racist as they've been led to believe by primarily and particularly black men, but even white media, right? And this ignorance flies in the face of facts, right? So we know that 1% of white men marry black women. 1%. But that flies, even though that flies in the face of what many divestors, swirlers, or just black women who advocate for other black women to expand their options because the black community is like a cesspool of loserdom, or whatever they call it, Blackistan, and all type of pejoratives. It shows people kind of pining or hurting, right? And this speaks to delusion, right? They're hurting. The environment is crushing right now. We have this insane inflation going on in America, which feels like some 20%. And this happened over the span of the past 3 or so years because of COVID. And the correction the economy had to go through anyway, but also because of, COVID. And that has kind of put this divestor conversation, the swirler conversation, and what is best for black women as a group, but individual black women, into question. COVID-19 did not tamp this down, right? It actually accelerated this in many ways. And so we kind of have this exaggeration of, or this acceleration of this conversation when it comes to white men being kind of this silver bullet. And there is something to be said about marriage being the number one, or divorce being the number one indicator of poverty. There is something to be said about the quickest way actually into wealth is to marry into it. That's a fact. And there is something also to be said about a certain level of ignorance when it comes to class, and the class of men that can provide women in general in America a particular lifestyle tend to marry women of their class, right? And their race. And more often their class, or better yet, more often their race than their class, but of their class and their race. And this puts black women who primarily come from working class, poor backgrounds at a severe disadvantage when it comes to marrying white men. And that is for the white men that are even interested, which we already know, once again, only 1% of white men marry black women. What Shay was speaking to, and she did a really good job, is kind of this delusion when you see the young white men, not even just the old white men, but the young white men, goose stepping around, hell Hitlering, 18th lettering, right? Or is it the 14th letters? I'm sorry. But and to see that going on, and to see how white men in particular responded to the ascendancy of Trump, and whether, regardless of whether they support him or not, but why they support him, why they voted for him, right? To see that, particularly on social media, and to say, yes, I want to be down with that regardless, speaks to not only just the ignorance that I was speaking about, but it also speaks to people making a very conscious decision, right, to go along with anti-blackness racism as long as they benefit them, and oftentimes not even benefit them in the long run, right? There were a number of women with the ascendancy of Trump that spoke about how their boyfriends, their white boyfriends, were saying racist things, right? We're doing racist things. With the ascendancy of Trump, we're saying things that they didn't think that they felt, right? And that speaks to a certain level of ignorance, because how did you not know, if you were in a relationship with this person for some 2, 3, 4+ years, how did you not understand their political leanings, right? It's because you didn't want to know. And like, that's very important. Their political leanings, their social leanings, what they think of race, politics, money matters. Once again, when ignorance is not bliss, right? When ignorance is not bliss, you find yourself having a mixed child with a racist man, and maybe that was not your intention. Now, for some of these swirlers and divestors, they are perfectly okay, right, with being in relationship with a neo-Nazi, because they themselves are neo-Nazis, right? I would like to direct y'all to Lexus Exodus and her speaking about these black women who, many of them met their unfortunate end at the hands of a white man. Many of them were disappeared, allegedly, by a white man, right? And when you've been told and taught that white men are fundamentally better than black men, they build, they provide, they protect, regardless of the fact that, once again, the median income for men is some $45-ish thousand a year, something give or take, right? And that's for men, once again, in America, before you control for race, right? When you think of the fact that 40% of women earn more than their male counterparts in America, once again, before you control for race, excuse me, that speaks to a certain level of ignorance when you speak about white men as if they are all builders and protectors, or even primarily, or in majority, better yet, builders and protectors, right? Because you have this very comical, exaggerated, cartoonish view of provider, of protector, right? A very Disney-esque understanding of these things. So what you see here is white men being able to do with women of color, not just black women, what they want to do, right? They get to run the board because of their color association with the elite white men that actually do own and control and run things. And so even if you're not a 1%er white man, or even a 5%er white man, or even a 10%er white man, or even a 20%er white man, you still get to run the yard when it comes to women of color because of your color association with the elite white men and the top 1, 5, 10, and 20%. And because you look like those men, you have an easier access to these women, and not only that, these women speak so highly of white male accomplishment as if that was an all white hands on deck project, right? This is why Cheddar Bob, as Charles liked to say it, can pull some of your baddest black women. Because it doesn't matter if he's accomplished or not. He's white. Right? But there's a consequence to that ignorance. And there's a consequence to truly believing that regardless of their environment, regardless of the pathology of the upbringing, that you yourself, because you have maybe achieved in your own right, because you have a college degree, because you have some type of status in the society, that automatically means that puts you in the same category as your everyday regular white guy in this anti-black society. And because racism, anti-blackness is primarily directed to your male counterparts, you truly think that relieves some of the stress on your shoulder. And it may, but not all the way, right? You know, y'all like, share, subscribe, hit the super chat. And so when you see this inflation, right, and you hear young people, before we control for race, yelling at the top of their lungs about these home prices and the fact that they can't buy new cars, and this kind of arrested development that hit many young Xers, millennials, and now Generation Z as they are coming of age more and more. You hear people complaining about that once again before we control for race. So this is not exclusive to the black community. And somehow, some way, you think dating out, marrying out, and throwing yourselves at primarily white men will alleviate that. Meanwhile, college enrollment is 60-40 split between women and men, and the number one group of men that have decided not to attend college has been white men. Not only per capita, but as a raw number. There is a consequence to this, right? And you let your swirler and divester say it, or tell it, better yet, you let your swirler and divester tell it, anything is better than hearing Blackistan with black men. Because black femicide, right? You let your divester, your swirler, or your divester or swirler adjacent or advocates tell it, black men are waking up in the morning and saying, which one of these black women am I going to abuse today? Which one of them am I going to hurt today? Which one of them am I going to victimize today? Because that is what I am supposed to do as a black man. And therefore, it behooves black women to expand their options. When black women have been expanding their options since we got off the plantation. There are people that would argue that they were expanding their options on the plantation, but I don't want to speak about black women in that, under duress in that way. So we'll leave that there. If we don't even want to factor Jim Crow, then let's start the clock at 1967 with Loving versus Virginia, right? And the repeal of the miscegenation laws. You still have white men making a very bold statement in who they decide to marry when they do marry interracially, which is Asian women. And the question then becomes, for these swirlers and divestors, Is it truly your loyalty to black men, or is it that these non-black men are that anti-black? Particularly anti-black women, right? Right? And how much of this kind of self-aggrandizing, um, placating, ego stroking language do you want others to engage in for your self-esteem? Right? This does have an effect on not just these individuals, but the overall conversation in the black community. Because when you think you have this kind of escape hatch and you don't have to come to terms with anti-blackness and racism, and you think and you speak as if it's an excuse that black men are making, right? For their lack of performance and their lack of building and their lack of masculinity and their lack of manhood and they're just lazy bums. There is a consequence to truly believing that, right? There is a consequence to that. Right? So, now that we're here, and it's very clear that America is kind of going through this phase where no one really knows what's going to happen next. And you're seeing how people are responding, and you're seeing how people are balkanizing, essentially, across gender lines, class lines, race lines. And black women are saying we have no one but ourselves. And others are saying that also. That statement is not exclusive to black women. Black women are screaming from mountaintops how horrible black men are. And others hear that. And other men hear that. And that will have an effect on black women's relationships with these other non-black men. The author of Dataclysm, Christian Rudder, speaks about the dynamic of interracial dating and relationships and how black women were ranked so low by non-black men. Right? Every single time this conversation comes up, non-black men are very clear about where they rank black women, what they think of black women, what they feel about black women. Now, divestors and swillers would have you believe it's because black men haven't built a society, or black men haven't built something to put black women on this pedestal, right? The 6% of black men in America that are former slaves or colonized in the West or in Africa, it is their fault that non-black men, primarily white men, view black women this way. Right? Now, what we have from Dr. Chantal Buggs and Dr. Jennifer Lundquist, with both of them having their own independent research, and Dr. Jennifer Lundquist, a white woman actually writing a book about this, actually speaks about how when it comes to dating, at least online dating, it's all about race. And white men run the yard. It is the number one indicator for everything, pretty much. And in the heterosexual world, white men run the yard. And contrary to popular belief, it's not black men that has a racial bias. It's women of color that includes black women that have a racial bias towards white men. White masculinity is the standard. And that's understandable when you live in America. That is understandable. But a particular brand of elite white masculinity being the standard puts black women at a detriment because those white men have shown for decades how uninterested they are in majority in black women. This is not so much, and I want those that are listening to understand where I'm going with this. This is not so much about black women's weight or black women's attitude, not even about black women's image and in the popular conscience of Americans. It's simply because black women are black women and black people were brought to America to be the permanent underclass. And until black women truly address that, they can do whatever they want to do, all these little side things, and it still will fail for the vast majority of them, including the vast majority of swirlers and divestors. Until you address the fact that America bought black people, black American, ADOS, FBA particularly, to America to be the permanent underclass. Not just free labor during slavery, but that transformed into a consciousness in American society that black people are supposed to be the stepping stone. They're supposed to be the bottom. There is a permanent bottom, there is a permanent top. The permanent top is white people, white men specifically, and then the permanent bottom is black people, black men or black women, depending on what you're speaking about. So even if the goal was to expand your options, until you can truly address that, you will always just be the fun time girl as a group. Right? You will continue to be the fun time girl as a group. Much of that won't even be because of anything you in particular did wrong. It's because of the power dynamic and everyone knowing the power dynamic and everyone knowing the how desperate you are to be validated by non-black masculinity, primarily, particularly white masculinity. Right? And that allows for a certain relationship and power dynamic that's not actually advantageous for black women. That allows for multiple black women to be found dead in the presence of white men, and those white men still haven't been investigated or haven't even seen a day in jail. Right? People know what's going on. There have been multiple videos of white men, particularly younger white men, who are saying, black women, stop worshiping me. Black women, I'm not as great or better than black black women, I'm not as great or better than black men the way you think. There have been multiple videos of white men saying this to black women because of the concept that white men, non-black men, are some type of elite by virtue of skin tone, skin color, is racist within itself. Because it's this assumption that white men have this money, this status. They've built something. There, somewhere in their family is some millionaire grandma, some millionaire uncle, some millionaire aunt. That person's gonna get some residual, the residual income somewhere. That money's gonna trickle down to them. They have some skill that's gonna make them a millionaire or a billionaire. And that allows for white men to take advantage of this concept that plays in many black women's heads, in many heads of women of color, not just black women. Right? This is where the race cells come in, right? The Latino, black, Asian guys, etc., that speak about how your average white guy doesn't necessarily have to be charismatic, doesn't necessarily have to be particularly good looking, doesn't necessarily have to have any money or status, but simply because they are white in this society, they have access to women that their men of color counterpart do not. And whether Miss Jennifer Lundquist or Dr. Jennifer Lundquist, show her proper respect, whether Dr. Jennifer Lundquist realizes or not, that is what she was speaking about when she spoke about online dating and kind of the fact that it pretty much revolves around white men. And for white men, it makes them no difference, right? Whether you get the vagina because the person actually likes you and actually enjoys your company, or whether you're getting the vagina just because you're white, it makes them no difference, right? And thank you, Dr. Thunder. Dr. Thunder says, here to support you, bro. Thank you, Dr. Thunder. It makes them no difference why they're getting the vagina as long as they get it, right? Why they're getting the attention. Why is it a bit easier for them? And so these swirlers, these divestors, will continue to run into situations with racist men because they truly believe, and this is for the ones of them that are not hunting racist white men, they truly believe, and this is a truth, they truly believe that there's no way you could have disdain, dislike, or hatred for black people, or even black women more specifically, and then still have sex with black women. Definitely not on a consistent basis. They truly believe that there's no way you would want to be in an intimate relationship with a black woman if you have disdain for black people, including black women. If you think you're better than black people, including black women. If you think black people, including black women, are a lesser form of human being, if they're human beings in the first place. There are those that are confused about the fact that for many people, particularly men, particularly white men, sex is a power game. The chase is a power game. Or for white men in particular, with women of color, the lack of chase, the fact that he doesn't have to put in much effort also is a power game. You would think in you would think in this late date that women of color would understand this, particularly black women. And even if they did want to engage in these relationships, they wouldn't be screaming from the mountaintop how horrible black men are and how just about any white men would do. Right? Shout out to the sister Toya. Toya, what did I say? She said 100. What did I say? Right. As we're going through this shedding or this idea amongst young people that relationships, particularly marriage, is not worth it, right? It's interesting to see that this particular group of black women really believe that their interracial marriage rate is going to go up as the overall marriage rate in America comes down, right? So as marriage becomes more of a class exercise and elitism for the top 20% of Americans, primarily white Americans, what black women in this kind of divester adjacent, swirler adjacent, level up adjacent, right? Black girl in luxury adjacent, what they're saying is as this becomes more of a class exercise in elitism, marriage, that black women who primarily come from working class, lower middle, right, poor backgrounds, somehow their marriage rate is going to go up as the overall marriage rate in America comes down. Right? Instead of us having a conversation about the systemic issues and how did Americans get here, the hyper individuality, the materialism, the consumerism, the Americans becoming more and more atomized, right? The neoliberal order that crushed all concept of community. This is not exclusive to the black community, by the way. That crushed concepts of community, that crushed concept of unionization, clearly crushed concepts of everybody's virtue signaling. So what ends up happening is that the people of your group that occupy the top of your group, especially particularly in race, virtue signal to the rest of us, to the rest of the group. But quite frankly, they're practicing some of that elitism also, right? This is why the wealth gap in the black community is even more exaggerated than in white society. But yet these same people who do not actually advocate for policies that would be beneficial for all black people, particularly black people on the bottom, still do the black talk, right? And because you have the system deciding that women, white women particularly, should be holding the mantle of imperialism, talking about American imperialism, right? Some of the residuals have fallen onto black women. And what that means is black women want to practice some of this elitism and classism also. And the best way for them to do that is to marry into it. That would mean primarily marrying into white families And white mothers and white fathers that occupy this elite space are just not letting that happen, as evidence of the past 50 or so years. And once again, because we're not having class conversations, income and wealth conversations in the black community, you're only left with respectability politics and neoliberal build it yourself business entrepreneurial talk without any of the conversation about how did this actually work in America over the past 400 and 500 years. Once again, free labor through slavery, right? Jim Crow, which was wealth transfer, which was the continuation of wealth transfer. The Homestead Act, right? Tax cuts for marriage, all of the things that help to build that, right? The government being giving some space for unions, which Reagan crushed in the 80s, right? Which which helped to create the concept of community and perpetuate it, right? Pushing the middle class because the middle class would be your consumers, right? And they would be invested in the system because they got so much from it. But when you decide to stab them in the back, the residuals effects is that everything falls apart. It was a house of cards from the beginning. You pulled too many cards. And so it all came crumbling down. And because we have so many in the black community that refuse to have that conversation, you end up where we are now. Right? And so the question then becomes, if we're going to have the divester talk and the swirler talk and the black women in luxury talk and the black women level up talk and black women playing with being in relationships even with white racist men that they know are white racist men, the questions then become, one, how has neoliberalism affected black women? How has commodification affected black women? And we're asking, how has it affected the way they see the world and the way they see men and the way they see the opposite sex and the way they think of their race and of black men? So, how has neoliberalism affected black women in the way they see the world? Has the commodification of people, including ourselves, affected the way black women see the world? How has atomization affected the way black women see the world? Right? Hyper-materialism, hyper-consumerism, the system telling you that you will define yourselves and your humanity by the products you buy and the brands you support, the cars you drive, the neighborhood you live in will be how you define your humanity. So the nicer car and the nicer neighborhood means you're just a better person. It's not just about the fact that you can afford these things. It's that you are simply a better person because you can afford these things. Because you can occupy these spaces. And how have black women internalized that? And then how have they now seen black men and other men of color and white men? Right? Y'all like, share, subscribe, hit the super chat. So Shay gave us a lot to kind of chew on. It was her video was some 10 or so minutes. Once again, she did a very good job. The link is in the description if you need to see it yourselves. But it is something that black people they have to wrestle with. This is not something you actually can escape, especially when we're speaking about half of your population. Yes, swirlers are not every black woman. Not every black woman is a swirler or divester. Quite frankly, most of them are not. But this is a loud contingent of black women who occupy much of the social media space, right? And even for the non-card carrying swirlers and divestors, there's still this black men ain't ish, other men are better kind of ethos that goes around in these spaces, these black women empowerment spaces. And these people still, and it's not exclusive to black women or black people. This is kind of an American problem, which is kind of not really looking at the bigger picture, the overall picture, and seeing where you fit and why you are where you are. It's not just your neighbor, right? And to be frank, Mr. Z has mentioned this multiple times. You come out in the early 70s and America is feeling some pain, right? America's feeling some pain because you had LGBTQ rights, black civil rights, women's rights, you had environmental movement all happening simultaneously all through the 50s and 60s and early 70s, right? And excuse my background, y'all, right? You had all of that happening simultaneously. You know? And so the elite and the Powell memo is clear as day. For those of you that don't read the Powell memo or look up the Powell memo, there's a couple of videos on YouTube that speak about it. There's a couple of articles that speak about it. The elite literally waged war on all of these people. On us. And so that's what you're dealing with now. And so you were taught to just be this hyper individual because you yourself don't pose a threat to the system. And 10 of you don't pose a threat to the system. It's when you get to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions, do you? And so if I can socialize 2 to 3 generations now to be very hyper individualistic and then there is no greater cause. You find your humanity through products and through the high of shopping and having something new for 5 seconds. When you socialize an entire 3 or so generations in that now, right? It's not just the products on the shelf. You yourself are a product, and then the persons you're looking at, especially of the opposite sex, they are too a product. And who wants the janky product of a man? You want the nicest man. And here comes white men. Right? Shout out to what's that? IP13, what's going on, bro? He says, Yo, Z, sac passe, na boule. That's just another way of saying what's up in Creole for all of you that don't know. Right? And so there's a lot to be left. And I would encourage other content creators to kind of play with this, right? We've done a lot. We've spoken about this a lot, but I think the angle that Shay kind of went with this was interesting, and it kind of strips a lot of the emotions out of the conversation, and we get into the brass tacks of like, okay, we see a resurgence of white supremacy. We see it's not like it went anywhere, but we see kind of a resurgence of it, and and white supremacy might be dying. That's true, but this is kind of its death throes. And during this particular death row, you see many young people kind of getting into this. They're playing with some of this language. And what does that mean for many young white men to be playing with some of this iconography, some of this language, harkening back to 1940s, early 40s, and 1930s Germany, right? And yet, in this same environment, you have a number of black women saying they're seeking interracial relationships with primarily white men, right? What does that mean for the black community as a group, for black men particularly, and even for black women particularly? What will that mean in 5 and 10 years when you have a number of mixed people, right? Particularly black women with black children that are the products of black women, white men, who the father was, you know, what's the name of the guy? I forgot his name, just slipped me that quickly. The name of the white man that was part of the Proud Boys, who had the black wife, right? He had the mixed son, I think it was. He was a Trump supporter, and I think they were on divorce court at one point, right? That is what some black women are playing with. You are now the black wife to a known white supremacist. Mark Holtz asked for the name of the memo again. You could just put Powell memo, Powell memo. I think it's two L's. I don't think it was one. Right? And it pretty much talks about the corporate takeover of America. Whatever little government, you know. And this also speaks to elites pretty much telling you, yeah, nah, nope. All of that you're talking about, no, 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 no. Just worry about making money. So when Mr. Z says, and actually got this from Zoe Williams, and I think it's a genius statement, your concepts of love come from economists, right? Your concepts of love come from economists. I mean, there is no explanation needed for that statement. And so, of course, these swirlers and divestors are going to deem black men lacking. And then you factor in class and you factor in education and wealth distribution in America. Oh, it's all about the white man, the elite white man running the yard. You also often see this even amongst white men when they have the INCLS conversation. The elite white men just pretty much saying, just get your money. Just get your money up and you won't have to worry about anything. Saying that to other white men, right? Get your money up, go to the gym, and you'll be good to go. It's a class argument. So if you're a black woman, college educated black woman, you're making okay money, you have a bit of status, you're upwardly mobile, you can't hear black men talking race because for you, and especially the way intersectionality has informed you, black men don't have greater plights than you, definitely not, and they're men, so they actually have a one up on you because intersectionality has informed you that you're the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. And so if you've made it from lower middle class humble beginnings to a certain level, then why can't black men? And it's not that they can't, they're making excuses. Right? Right? And that is what black women oftentimes are led to believe on purpose. And so, to end out, I predict more and more black women engaging in same sex relationships and, quite frankly, just being super single. And more of them will be virgins for longer into their adulthood. More and more of them will spend years on end celibate. More and more of them will engage in same sex relationships. And once again, more and more of them will just be super single. Because if you think you're better than your male counterparts, your black male counterparts, right? You're doing better than them in life. You're just better. You're more emotionally intelligent. You're more educated. You're of higher status. So you're better than your black male counterparts. So there's that. White men, in vast majority, are still too anti-black. Non-black women are still too anti-black. That leaves black women in a very precarious situation. You can either engage in relationship with men that you think you're better than, that's black men. You can hold out for the non-black person, whether that's a woman or a man, who is, open to interracial relationships with a black woman. But the two that seem most likely, and you see it happening now, is black women engaging in same-sex relationships with other black women or being single for years on end. And that doesn't mean necessarily they're not having sex years on end, but more and more, that is what's happening. And it's not just about the sex, it's about the intimacy and the feelings and the connection, right? Those are the outcomes. As evidenced by even some of your favorite content creators who openly admit they've been celibate for how long? Years. Or their relationship life is trash. Or they're single and they have two cats and they live by themselves. Or now they're practicing polyandry and what's the other one? Polygamy and not polygamy, polyandry, or something along those lines, right? Your favorite black women content creators are openly admitting this. which means their own particular worldview is biting them in the rear end. And these women they could have sex. None of them are necessarily hideous. But when you take into consideration the way they view men, black men in particular, the way they view money, the way they view power, the way they view wealth, the power dynamic they want to play, they themselves psych themselves out of relationship with your average man. And there you go. Thank you, Indigo Flow Polygyny. Right? Toya, you killed me just now. Toya said, I will not be the stereotype, and not I. Right? Oh, and how did I forget? Of course, the rise in pet moms. That's definitely going to happen. Dog moms and cat moms. Oh, that's. You saw that with the Xers. With the older Xers, you saw the rise in that. It's going to be insane as the Gen Z come of age. Right? And so I'll truly pause right there. Once again, shout out to Shay Sade. Great video. Well done. Thoughtful. And it's unfortunate. We you have in the video you had a white man pretty much insulting black women by literally showing, fried chicken and macaroni and cheese on a plate and like, hey, look what I got for you. Almost as if he was speaking to a dog. Here, come here, come here, come here, come here. Right? Or excuse my language, like Dave Chappelle on his stand up. Gotcha, bitch. Right? And that's unfortunate. So from the top to the bottom, working class, lower middle, poor women, black women in particular, all the way up to your corner office, is this longing for validation from white men in particular. Not black men, not other men of color, but particularly white men. And that's, once again, that is not exclusive to black women, but because we're black men, that's who we're speaking about. Right? And white men are, they've heard this. They have gotten wind of this. Right? And that's going to have consequences on black women's lives. And black men, to be frank. Once again, a growing mixed group of white black Americans with a anti-black racist black mother and then anti-black racist white father. Whew. And then this person might have some class position over the rest of black America. Ooh, not pretty, not pretty at all. So I'll truly pause right there, gave y'all something to think about. Other content creators, you know, y'all go ahead and kind of munch on this a little bit. Once again, great job to Shay Sade. And I'll truly pause right there. Love, peace, and chicken grease. Y'all enjoy the rest of y'all day. Check out other Black Manosphere content creators. And like y'all know, Mr. Z always likes to say, check out other content, information, news, documentaries, right? About what's going on in the world so you don't end up sounding like these people. especially for the brothers. Don't end up chasing after some non-black draws, right? Getting deleted by that chick. Now we got to go protest for you, right? Because she got away with it, or they're not even investigating her, right? And I'll truly pause right there. Y'all have a great rest of y'all day. Mr. Z out.